For those of you who are about to set up a small shop, whether it's in a one-car garage or in a building in your backyard, there are several things you need to take into consideration. First thing we need to take into consideration is the length and width of your shop. For example, if I was to stretch out my arms, they're nearly touching the walls on each side. That's because my shop is just a little over 8 feet wide, and that could be a challenge, especially when I'm trying to do anything that is really long, like a 2x4. I'm constantly hitting the ceiling or the walls whenever I'm moving stuff around. Now, my shop may be a little bit longer than your standard one-car garage, which is usually somewhere around 12 by 20. My shop is a little over 30 feet long, but I'd be happy on certain days to give up that length to gain that extra 4 feet in width. So we just got to work with the room that we have. Now, if you watch a bunch of channels on YouTube, there might actually be a little bit of a camera trick on the size of their shop. They may actually be working out of a 1 or maybe 2-car garage. But if you put a wide angle lens right here on the camera, it makes everything look so much bigger. Now, one of the first things I would suggest is to actually draw out what your shop looks like. You can do this on a computer, or you can just hand draw it out. And in the process, you want to put all placement of where exactly all the large tools are going to be, maybe some of your workbenches, where your doors are going to be out, and easy access in and out of your shop. You just want to know where everything is in advance before you start placing it around. Now, if you're just starting out and you only have a couple tools, or maybe you don't have any at all, drawing it out will at least give you an idea of how you can expand in the future without causing any problems. Now, if possible, try to position your shop around a large bay door or a garage door. That way you can get large lumber in and big projects out really easily. In some cases, for example, like mine, you may only have a 3-foot door, and that kind of limits the size of the projects you can build within your shop. In fact, here recently, I built a dog house that, well, it ended up being just a little bit too big to get out my door. It ended up being somewhat of a fiasco trying to get that out. I made this thing too wide and I can't get out any of my doors. So I'm gonna have to find some strategic way to unbolt a couple things, unscrew them, and, well, hope for the best to get it out. It was funny, it was a challenge, I finally got it out, but just keep in mind that you need to limit your size, double and triple measure all your projects so you know ahead of time before you goof up and now they're, well, permanently in your shop. Now, when you're setting up your shop, it's very important to know where all of your electrical outlets are, because if they're along one side of your shop and you want tools on the opposite, that could be a problem. You could try and run electrical cords, but that right there could be a trip hazard, or if you're running too much amperage, you could start a fire. So know ahead of time exactly where all of your electrical outlets are, and if you need to install some, do it in the beginning. For example, later on, after I started this shop and organized it somewhat like I wanted, I had to go back and add a 220 outlet. So therefore, I had to go and literally take all my holders off the wall, all my French cleats down, take the wall apart, and rewire a ton of stuff. And that allowed me to have a larger outlet, but it was a very big challenge. So please keep that in mind, kind of get an idea of the tools you want in the future, and wire your shop before you start putting everything in. Now, one of the things that is commonly forgot about when you're starting out woodworking or building a small little shop is dust collection. I didn't realize how important it was when I first started until I did a little bit of research and I realized how bad the dust is for your lungs and your body. So you need to have some kind of dust collection setup. Now, I was very fortunate to have a larger system here, but you don't have to have this big of a system. In many cases, a small shop vacuum can collect that dust for you. And if I didn't have that large dust collector, I would have actually taken one of these small shop vacuums and I would have installed it right here under my miter saw. So whenever I was using it, this vacuum would collect all that dust for me. Another option would be to purchase a little bit larger vacuum, one that is on wheels so that you can easily move it around to everything in your shop and collect the dust that way. Now, if you are able to use one of these larger dust collection systems, let me show you how I ran my piping and my hoses to get the most out of my space. Now a lot of times in a workshop, the upper corner is just not utilized. It's just empty open space, and that is why I decided to run my dust collection system all along that corner edge, and that will allow me to use the most of my space. I then ran some hoses down from that upper piping down to the tools. And then when the piping came to the end, I put a 90-degree and stretched it out over to the other side of my shop so I can have some dust collection there. Now when it comes to a small shop, storage is very important. And as you can see behind me, I love French cleats. I think it's a great way to get everything off of your shelves and onto the wall, have easy access, and still have plenty of room all around you. And anytime you build a workbench or any kind of setup, make sure you have storage underneath. You can have doors on it or you can have it open like this, but you want to utilize every little bit of space. You can even build little shelving back in here on your shelves so that it's kind of like a double layer and you can get even more and more storage underneath there. Now, if you have any mobile tools or things that move around, make sure you utilize the space that is underneath. This is a workbench that I have mobile, but I've also utilized some of the space by getting some of these pull-out little flip top little holders that are great at storing a bunch of little pieces, little connectors, screws, and nails that just don't fit in other locations. You may want to consider some of these storage bins. I believe some people use these for shoes. This is a 14 by 8 by almost 5 inches, and it's great for storing some of your larger items, or if you have a bunch of items, for example, like bungee cords. I stick mine in this one right here, and I labeled it bungee cords. This allows me to stick it up on the top shelf, up and out of the way, so that I can utilize that space as well, but I can easily see what it is so I can grab it when I need it. And just because I love French cleats doesn't mean I don't utilize some pegboard as well. These are great for smaller items, things that can easily get knocked off of your French cleats or just isn't really worth making a holder for, so consider that as well. Now, if you hate to get any kind of dust on any of your tools, you may want to consider some kind of cabinetry to go up and out of the way in your corner of your shop. I don't really prefer these because I like to see where my tools are so I can grab them easily, but that is totally up to you. Now in the end, don't be surprised if you still have a few things laying on your workbench. Even though I have all these French cleats and all this storage, you're still going to have occasions when you lay stuff on your workbench and it just starts to collect. Unfortunately, that's just one of the problems you're going to have in a small shop. So just get used to, on occasion, just organizing and cleaning up. Now whether you have a large shop or a small shop, you're going to need a little bit of space for some lumber, for your storage, whether it's plywood or hardwood or just basic 2x4s. You need an area to store this out of the way. Right here I have a lumber rack with a few layers on it to allow me to separate some of these out, but still have a general area where everything is. But don't be surprised if you find yourself storing a bunch of your lumber on your workbench as well. And if you have any tools that stick out from the wall, you can also use that space for lumber storage. And of course, if you're in a small shop, don't buy too much plywood or too much lumber, or in my case here, it's going to be real tight to get past your tools. So just be careful on that. Now at some point in your workshop, you're going to want a workbench. Some of these can be attached directly to the wall and be really rigid, or in my case here, you can build them to be mobile. I prefer the mobile just so I can move it around and just get it out of the way when I need to, since my shop is so narrow, but you can build it to whatever you'd like. I'd highly recommend actually using a couple sawhorses and some plywood, at least initially, and that way you can kind of get a general idea of how big you want your workbench, how high you want your workbench, and so forth. For example, some people like their workbenches really low, some people like them high. For example, this one right here, it is about 41 inches tall, and I'm 5'11". So and some people will consider that really tall for me, but this is the way I like it because I like to be able to lean over just a little bit and rest my arms on the workbench when I'm building something, and that allows me to not have to lean way over and hurt my back or just have an achy back because of everything I'm doing. This allows me to get it nice and easily. So whatever you do, build it to your own specifications that you would like. You don't have to build a really fancy one that you'll see in some people's shop. Yes, those are nice in some occasions, but in most cases, you just need a basic sturdy workbench. And a suggestion for the top of your workbench, you might want to consider some of these Fisker cutting mats. These are usually used for crafting, but they're self-healing. I have glue on it, I've drilled into it, and a bunch of other abuse, but they've saved the top of my workbench. Now once you start woodworking, there's a very good chance it's going to get very hard to throw away scraps. Trust me, I understand. It's extremely hard for me to throw away anything for that matter. Now, I've kind of got a rule. If it's exotic wood or if it's hardwoods, things that can really help in the future or that are just really expensive, I try to save as much of that as possible. But if it's pine or spruce or anything that you can relatively run to your home improvement store and buy easily, I'd probably get away with those if they're less than 12 inches long. Now, you can always use those as boards that you drill into as sacrificial pieces, so I keep a few of those as well. But anything hardwood or exotics, I try to store those away for special occasions. Now, anytime you have any large tools in your shop, once you find the best location for it, I strongly recommend marking your floor so you know exactly where it goes. You can use a marker, you can use tape, or you can even use a pen or pencil if that works on your floor. Now, this right here will allow you to move it out of the way just in case you need to in an emergency or just in the way for a fashion, and allow you to move it right back exactly where it was without any guesswork. This is great for me because I move a bunch of my tools over into a corner to keep them out of the way when I'm not using them. This will allow me to bring it back exactly where I know it works the best and it has the most room around it, and then I can utilize that tool to the best of its ability. Now, if you're trying to utilize a smaller space within a bigger area, for example, let's say you have a 2-car garage, but you're only going to use one bay so your spouse can still continue to park over in the other area, I want to suggest getting maybe a large curtain or some large plastic barriers to help minimize that dust transfer so that vehicle doesn't get all dirty and your spouse getting mad at you. So just get something maybe like some metal conduit, 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch, should work and be able to span about 10 foot with very little bow in it, and then you can easily draw your curtain back and forth and minimize some of that dust. Depending on your space, you may or may not have an area that you can have a permanent workbench. For example, this right here is a permanent bench that is attached to the wall. I can put heavy tools on it and I don't have to worry about it moving around. But if you're working in a really small space, sometimes this is not an option. You may want to consider actually a foldable unit, foldable table that can be attached to the wall. These can be built really strong and really heavy duty to be able to handle some of your heavier tools. But if by chance you need it out of the way, you can remove those tools, fold it down, and it'd be nice and tight against the wall. Here's a little bonus for you. If by chance you're going to be using some mechanics tools in your workshop, I would strongly suggest having a secondary workbench to do all that maintenance on, because you can easily get grease and oil from the cars or mechanic tools that you're using on your workbench, and then it's going to be a real challenge sometimes to avoid those areas whenever you're trying to do woodworking. So if you're going to use mechanic tools, have a secondary workbench. Now, if you enjoyed these tips, I have some other beginner videos right over here, so make sure you check them out.